Hello everybody, good to see you back here on the channel. Now today I want to bring you out here on location and show you a shoot that I did just the other night. Now I decided to bring you back out here in the daytime because it's just so much easier for you to get a picture of what I had in my mind and why I chose these particular locations. So I would say that the most common question that I get asked about my nightscape photography is, how do you find the locations that you go out to shoot at night? Well, I can tell you right now, it's a very simple answer to that question. I spend a lot of time in the daytime, just like this, driving up and down these dirt tracks and looking out for something that I perceive could become a great scene for a nightscape image. Now here is one such scene. Now I can tell you straight up front, this does not jump out at you, this scene. In fact, I could have driven past here, just glanced out the side and looked at this and thought, oh well, that's just another little tree and another collection of water in a dam. But sometimes you just have to start thinking the bigger picture. And for me, that begins by firstly knowing exactly what direction I'm looking at. So it becomes a matter of understanding what's happening in the sky. Okay, so at different times of year, you have different objects in the sky that you want to take pictures of. So for me here in Australia, in the Southern Hemisphere, August, September, October, we have the Milky Way galactic core, which sets down in the western sky. So when I'm driving my car down roads like this, I'm thinking, okay, that's the west. So if I'm going to compose an image with the setting Milky Way galactic core, then I need to have a view to the west. It is as simple as that. And this is what I have here. Just a view, nice big open sky in the west. And from there, I start thinking to myself, okay, I've got a nice big open sky to the west. What can I place in the foreground of my image to bring the scene to life? So here we've got a dam. Nothing really special about this. Fence in the front here, and a little sapling tree. That's it. There isn't anything else in the scene. But you know, from my experience over the years, a small, insignificant scene like this can look okay. I'm not saying it's spectacular, it's not the Grand Canyon, but it doesn't matter. It's all about what you do with the scene. The Milky Way galactic core setting down in that sky is the jewel in the crown. It makes it come together. Now I know I would have mentioned this on many occasions in heaps of my videos, but you know, I never arrive at a location without some sort of plan. And the planning is best served by being here like I am now in the daytime. I've got a really clear picture of what's around in the background. I can see the foreground quite clearly. I know all about the intended location before I even get here. And that just saves a lot of time when I get out here at night time. And then I can just get into the nitty-gritty of setting my camera up, working out the lighting and things like that that are very necessary to get the shot. All right, so I worked out pretty early that I was going to be shooting a panorama here because I wanted to fit a fair bit in. Now the other thing about shooting a pano is here, as I said, in the Southern Hemisphere with the galactic core laying down flat in the western sky, it is actually quite wide. So oftentimes you'll benefit from shooting a panorama because you just fit more in. And I decided I was going to be shooting this with the 20mm focal length lens, so I'll fit a lot even in a single frame. So it doesn't take a lot of images in a panorama to get the width that you're looking for. And in this case, I decided I would shoot the foreground first. And the reason for that was because the Milky Way was still pretty high up in the sky. My intention was to shoot a tracked sky panorama. And I estimated that it would only take about 6 images in a portrait orientation. So I'll put the camera around like so. Click, 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 click. 6 images on the foreground. And then I would put my camera on the tracker and do 6 exactly the same way. So then it's a matter of getting enough light. But my foreground was just dark. So I decided to use some low-level lighting. So as with my typical lighting setup, I wanted to cross-light the scene. And this becomes very important because I wanted the light to sort of flow across from the sides rather than just front on where the camera angle is. And so I was going to be facing pretty much front on to the dam here and the fence line. So I basically put one of these light stands on this side, one down the other side there. And the other thing I used was these Ulanzi, let me just get up close, Ulanzi VL49s. Now I've used these before. Now you'll notice on these, I've actually taped some CTO gel onto the front of these. And you might think to yourself, well, why would I do that? Because these are color changeable lights. What I've done is I am shooting this with a modified camera, which is the Astro mod that I use on my Z6 Mark II. And that throws the color balance all over the shop. And I've done a lot of experimenting with different lights and so forth and color balances. I've decided that if I set these to about 8,000 Kelvin with that half CTO gel across the front, it seems to balance the color out to the way that I like it for my foregrounds. As you would know, a Astro modified camera is only designed to capture more of that sort of red and pink and magenta nebulosity in the sky. It doesn't help us with our foregrounds at all. Our foreground is far easier to capture on a standard camera with no modifications at all. All right, so as far as light placement goes, that can be a bit of a problem, especially when you're shooting panoramas, because you're basically swinging the camera around to the edges of the frame. And that's where you're likely to be catching your light on the edges of the image. So normally if I was lighting this scene, I would probably put the light pretty high because I've got to try and throw it right across there. So I'll put it up as high as it'll go, like that. And also I'll probably bend it back a little bit so it's facing upwards a fraction. And the reason I would do that is to try and feather the light around the foreground rather than just blast the light. Now, the foreground down here has lots of texture. So I want to try and highlight the texture, but I don't want to blow it out. So then it's just a matter of working out how bright the light should be. To be honest, it's trial and error. In this case, I think from memory, I had it on about 3 or 4%. Normally I'd probably have it up here on this bank, but it was going to be in the frame too much. So I probably put it back closer to the tree here. And then it's just a matter of trying to make sure your light stand doesn't fall over because it's uneven ground. These are the challenges that we face doing our nightscape photography. So I put the other one down about here somewhere. This was quite challenging to get into. Lots of long grass, very wet and dewy, and difficult to get the light stand to actually sit properly. Sometimes I'll find a piece of old wood or something and lay it down on the bottom of the tripod leg here to make it more secure. And that's also, if it's windy, you may have to do that. But on the night that I was here, I didn't have to do that. Once again, I just angled the light up a little bit and shone it down there. Now I do remember one thing I did do though, because when the light was up the top here, I could see it shining above these bushes. So I actually dragged it down a little bit, probably to about here. And I found that that helped because it wasn't actually directly into the camera. It was hidden by these low bushes here. Now I had this one on just a little bit lower setting, probably about 2%. I don't want the scene to be too well lit, if that makes sense. I want the light to flow through it and sort of fall off, because that's what natural light does. It falls off a scene. It's typically brighter in one side than the other. And so that's what I was attempting to do here. So I have my camera about here, roughly about my head height. Now, when it comes to how high the camera is, typically I like the camera low down, because what that does, it makes the horizon line actually lower down. And most of the time I'd prefer that, especially if there's a foreground subject, a bit like this tree here. I don't really want that too far below the horizon. I want it to stand out. The height of the camera determines what it is that we highlight in our photograph. So for example here, if we want our foreground here or something that's close to the camera to be highlighted and made to be the focus of the image, then we get our tripod or a camera down lower, because the low angle makes that foreground appear larger. If we want the background to appear larger, then we put the camera up higher. Now, when it comes to the night sky, the Milky Way, that is huge. It is so big that it doesn't matter where you put your camera, high, low, or otherwise, it's still going to be huge. But it does determine what you see in your foreground. Now, one of the other things, I guess a little bit of a compromise in a scene like this is the dam. I want to be able to see the water. So if my camera is too low down to the ground, then I'm sort of skimming across the top of the water, which I don't want. The other reason I had the camera up there was because I was shooting in portrait orientation. And so I was getting more of the height. So in other words, I'm getting the grass, the fence, the dam, the tree, and the sky with my 20mm focal length. When you shoot a panorama, the other thing to remember is you tend to cut off the corners on the bottom and the top. So you have to overshoot. So I had to make sure I captured enough of this foreground that when I crop the image later on, it still includes the amount that I wanted. I had this at f2.8. I shot for 20-second shutter speeds at ISO 3200. Now I could have opened up the aperture. So here's this trade-off. It happens when you're shooting nightscape photography all the time. I could open my lens right up to f1.8, yes, and that would capture a lot more light in a shorter space of time. But the reason I didn't do that was because I wanted to somehow maximize my depth of field a bit to capture this grass in the foreground here in focus. So obviously at f2.8, the very close is not going to be, but I want to make sure everything else is in focus. So the more I stop down the aperture, the cleaner or more in focus my image will be. But obviously if I'm stopping down the aperture, I'm gathering less light. So in my case, by sort of balancing that up a bit, I just extended the shutter speed out a bit. And then you're going to say to me, well, oh, your stars are going to be trailing. 20 seconds will be a little bit of star trailing, but guess what? I'm going to shoot a tracked sky here. So does it matter if my stars are trailing a little bit? No. I shot at ISO 3200. Now, some others of you are going to say, okay, why don't you just extend the shutter speed further, 30 seconds or even 60 seconds? Well, yeah, I could do that too. I chose not to in this case because I wanted to just get through this a bit quicker. There are always multiple ways that you can shoot the same image, and I think it's really important for us to start thinking why, rather than just look at settings and say, oh, well, I've got to shoot this at 15, I've got to shoot that at f2.8. No, you don't. There are many, many options that you can shoot. I chose f2.8, 20 seconds ISO 3200, but I could have chosen other settings and come away with a very similar result. Just remember one thing though, I've got low level lights here. So whatever light I've added is affected by the settings that I choose. So if I shot it, say at f1.8 at 15 seconds, those lights are going to blow out. I'm going to have to drop them right down, because remember, the more you gather light, it captures more light of any light source. And that's especially true regarding low level lighting. So here you can see I've got my Move, Shoot, Move Nomad. With the Z6 Mark II, I used the 20mm focal length lens. This is a 50, don't worry about that. But what I did do is I moved away from this tree here, and I've got a nice clear sky. So I'm just further over to an opening. So when I swing the camera around to do my tracking, I'm not going to be hitting this tree which was on the side here. As you know, with the Star Tracker, the key is to get a nice level tripod. So it's only a 6-shot panorama, so it's not complicated. And the way I did it was really basic. So here I am in portrait mode. I've got the Alan Wallace V plate, which you've seen me use plenty of times in the past. And what that does, it gives you a level base to begin with here. And I think that's pretty important. So then I just make sure the camera's level, make sure I've got my sky where I need it to be. By the way, I only needed a single row, 20mm focal length, 6 shots side by side to get the whole sky here. Get it all lined up, turn the tracker on, go bang, start her up and take that shot. Now I shot these at 60 seconds, f2.8, ISO 1600. I shoot those settings quite a lot. When I've done the first one, just undo that, spin it round, take the next one. Technically speaking, the overlap was about 50%, but as far as exacting, well, it's not exact because I just did it by eye. I just look at the stars in the back of the camera and just move it across. There's nothing scientific about it, and some of those won't be overlapped 50. Some will probably be 70, maybe even 80, because sometimes I do that overkill. But the more overlap you have, the easier it is for the stitching program to stitch the images together. And you can also alleviate some of the vignetting that you get with shooting panoramas. But anyway, that's how I shot the sky portion of this panorama. And then all I did then was blend it with the foreground, and I think it turned out pretty well. All right, so once I captured this shot, I knew that there was a few other compositions around this area that I would like to have a go at on that night. So let's go and have a look at those. I'll show you my mindset for shooting those other images. Right, so here we are at a location that, yeah, I've shot here before. These two trees over here, which again has a brilliant perspective facing towards the west. So I want that arching Milky Way galactic core over the top. And also up here, it's on top of a hill, very exposed to the elements, but on the night that I was here, it was really calm and quite crisp and cold. So perfect for shooting Milky Way panorama. The tree wasn't moving around very much in the wind or anything like that. So yeah, really, really good location. I pretty much did the same thing here as I did in the previous shot, just by shooting the foreground, low level lights, had the lights set up very wide apart, probably I reckon about 40 meters apart, are very wide. So I had them a little bit brighter because of that. And in fact, I had one probably about here where I am, shooting down that way. I had the camera down a bit further down here, facing across that way. The arch goes right across the top of those trees. So I had my other light way down here, facing across that way. Now this grass here was horrifically wet and damp. And around here, there's all this red sort of clayey mud, which, well, that's not much fun either. But apart from that, I think it was a pretty good combination of lighting. The road goes right down the middle of the scene here. I think it's a pretty good composition. So at this point, I was on a bit of a roll, and I thought to myself, well, I'd passed, again, during a scouting location, this gorgeous tree just sitting up on a hill up here, all by itself. And I thought, yeah, that will be a perfect nightscape image. You know, sometimes you're just looking for something that happens to be separated away from other objects. And so trees, there's hundreds of trees around, but sometimes they are just congested. I found this tree, it had a nice bend, I thought, in the trunk. And so I shot that as well with two foreground lit shots. Now I didn't use low level lighting on this. I just used my torch and just did a quick sweep, one from the left, one from the right. I like a bit of shape. I like a bit of shadow. And also I did just a little bit of lighting on the foreground. There was rocks all scattered all over the paddock, green grass, and yeah, 20mm lens, single tracked shot behind this one. I absolutely love that photo. Now I think you all know I am an absolute sucker for a good windmill. And of course, around here in this part of Victoria, there's a lot of gorgeous windmills. And so I found one. I was shooting with the 50mm focal length, and I thought to myself, I've just got to capture this windmill in a portrait orientation. And I decided again to put a single tracked sky behind that windmill. Sometimes when the wind's blowing, they can wobble a bit from side to side, but on this night, it was as calm as anything. And I think the results speak for themselves. So there you have it. That's my adventure out under the stars. You know, the point of this video is probably to highlight to you guys that you don't need an epic location to shoot some fantastic nightscape images. Anyway, I hope it's encouraging to you guys. Get out there, search of these little backcountry tracks, and you just never know what you're going to find. Until I see you in the next video, have a great week. I'll see you later.